YouTube. And we're live. It is Monday, June 27th, 2022. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we're here to hang out once again with kind of one of the original gangsters of In Lieu of Fun guests, Carl Bergstrom. Carl, I should start off. I have a lot of things I want to talk to you about. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
I should start off by explaining the tweet that advertised you.
Yeah. I mean, are we going to talk about Watergate or not?
So speaking of misinformation, Scott, I don't know. So I didn't even realize this is what happened. But over the weekend, once I solidified you, and we also have a bunch of the brilliant women of Strict Scrutiny coming on Wednesday to talk about Dobbs, Leah Littman, Melissa Murray, and Kate Shaw, hopefully for various parts or part of the hour. Anyways, I announced this in our In Lieu of Fun chat, but it was without realizing it, my phone auto-corrected Bergstrom to Bernstein.
Oh,
and so Scott was like, "Holy cow, Carl Bernstein!" Wow. And I was like,
"Yeah, sorry."
He didn't even say that. He just said, "Wow, that's amazing." I was like, "Wow, Scott's really excited about Carl Bergstrom. I didn't even know he knew who Carl was." And
exactly. That's funny.
And then today we were going over and Ben was like, "It's Carl Bernstein Day," and I was like, no, what? What? No, absolutely. And then I went back and was like, "Oh yes, it did autocorrect that." And then I tried to type the correct thing and it autocorrected again. I was like, "This was completely my fault." But then it was perfect given what we're talking about. So here with Carl Bergstrom, who is not Carl Bernstein, and thank God, because we hear that guy's really boring anyway. Really happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Scott, you have a bunch of, I liked your question that you asked beforehand, but I want you, when we were just local, or even before we went local, about the misinformation about corvids, because I was saying,
oh yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, just that Carl's an expert in two things. I mean, not just two things, but two major things: corvids and misinformation. So now you got your 2x2,
right?
And so you wanna know what the biggest misinformation there is about corvids.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I said one thing beforehand, and I can repeat that, which was sort of they get a really bad rap as being really bad for farm crops and so forth, when actually they're quite good at eradicating pests in farmlands, both insect and small rodent. But the other misinformation about them that's really interesting is that they've got is the misinformation that they have yellow beaks. They don't have yellow beaks, but if you look at any cartoon crow, it'll have a yellow beak. And in fact, I recently asked Dolly, the new
the AI image generator,
to do me some various crows, and it made them with yellow beaks. And I asked Google's version of this. They've got some very, very fancy version of this, and I asked the guy running that to make me I think it was a crow in a top hat welcoming you into an enchanted forest or something, and that crow had a yellow beak. And so not only do cartoon crows have yellow beaks, but AIs have interpreted that, have internalized that, and so now AI will tell you that crows have yellow beaks.
So, but I mean, we off camera we were joking about big scarecrow, but why? What is this? What is the issue with scarecrows if crows are not bad for crops?
Aren't they all kinds of birds? That's
all kinds of birds. Yeah, I suppose that's right. Yeah. Sorry.
This is a big scarecrow does not want you to talk.
Exactly. That's my son is traveling in Norway and trying to get a hold of me, so I'm just going to let him know that otherwise I'll be fine.
Tell hopefully everything is okay, but
I think
feel free to check in with him.
I'm just doing that as we do.
So
this.
Are there is there a range of colors for beaks for different corvids? I feel like most birds have kind of a range of colors of beaks, right?
Yeah, I mean corvids are typically have black beaks. The exception are the choughs, so the choughs that you see in Cornwall have red beaks, and the alpine choughs actually have yellow beaks. But that's pretty much it for yellow beaks.
Huh. I wonder how that happened. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, the yellow-billed magpie has a yellow bill, as you might imagine.
But when you put it into Dolly, did it give you like illustrations of crows, like, or like were they like comical, like they were like
they're kind of
animations?
Like, yeah, kind
drawings?
of like comical, kind of painting type things. Yeah.
Okay, but it wasn't like Audubon's or something, was it?
No. It wasn't anything that cool. It was like more like just I don't know, something that somebody would put on
like
on a fan art site or something, right?
Yeah, like clip art or something. Yeah.
But still, I want to get back to the issue about scarecrow. So
okay.
I mean, are we?
I have scarecrows if the crows are on average good.
Thank you. Yeah.
I suppose you see the crows. I mean, well, farming practices may have changed. They may not be on average. They may not always have been on average good. Is one possibility.
Oh, you just muted.
It's fucking big scarecrow.
Yeah, I actually think that this is happening. They're just like, Carl, how did you just suddenly mute? That was so weird. Oh my God. Okay, I just tried to unmute you. Oh my gosh. Okay, refresh your screen and then come back in. We'll bring you back in. Scott, did you do this on purpose? Is this actually like a bit you coordinated with him beforehand?
No, I will say that I had no idea that I would wake up today uncovering one of the biggest scandals in American history.
Oh, here it is. Thank God.
Okay. See, I mean,
you will not be silenced.
No. Carl
just
Bernstein,
like Carl Bernstein
on this one. Exactly.
Yeah.
Wait till I break this wide open.
So we were just saying that maybe farming practices have either it used to be efficient to do it, but
yeah, that might be. I mean, another possibility is that is of course that they're useful for some birds but not others. Third possibility is I'm just wrong. I mean, that's always a perfectly reasonable possibility that my sources are no good. So those are three I would lead to.
But I like I will stick with the yellow bills as like I think that seems like huge misinformation. I read a paper. Well, you'll like this, Carl. When I was in college, I took a graduate class on similarity judgments in cognitive neuroscience. And one of the things that, or it was a categorization in similarity judgments. And one of the things that we did was we learned about was naive physics. And I did an entire presentation. I mean, it actually took me forever, but I loved it. But it was an entire presentation about how maybe naive physics comes from Looney Tunes. Because literally, if you watch Wile E. Coyote chase the Roadrunner and the trajectory of various types of, yes, exactly, all of these types of things, that maybe we've only been testing naive physics for as long as children have been learning about physics from cartoons. Anyways, it was
right. So that's such a great, I mean, it's a great example of how big this problem is about misinformation, is that in some sense it is coterminous with writing stuff down or something.
No, that's such an excellent, I didn't even think of it like that, but that is an even greater, broader point. Yeah. Which brings us kind of to what we're going to talk about today. Yes. So do you want to talk about your new paper that you have? I'm going to put a link to your tweet thread into the chat. Is that okay?
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be fine. So one of the things I was thinking would be interesting to talk about today is about how we need to change science education for a world with misinformation, where misinformation is so important, because we live in this world where misinformation is not only say leading people to try to overthrow the U.S. government, but also leading people to disbelieve absolutely critical information about science, whether it's the fact of anthropogenic climate change or the safety and efficacy of vaccines for COVID or anything else. And that's, of course, causing tremendous amounts of trouble for society. So the question is, well, what do we do about something like this? And one way I kind of think about it is that in 1957, the U.S. got this shocking wake up when this little basketball-sized object was discovered to be orbiting the planet, and that was Sputnik. The U.S. felt like, wow, there was this terrifying science and technology gap that they were worried about with respect to the Soviet Union. And so there was this enormous effort in many directions, but one of the main thrusts, and it's fascinating to listen to President Eisenhower's original speech, because it's, his original speech, explaining that Sputnik was there, focuses in great part on the need for science education in the United States. And since then, there was this effort to pour an enormous amount of effort into science education. And the idea, largely, though not exclusively, was to create this cadre of insiders, people that could become the next science and technology workforce. And so we're trying to teach people the skills that they needed to get to, whatever point that they could go from sort of marginal insiders, as you might be after graduating with a bachelor's of science, to, full insiders who have actually been practicing science, working in a federal lab or at a university or an industrial lab or whatever. And so that was very much the aim of science education after Sputnik. And that's been the aim of science education ever since, is to teach people the facts and skills that they need to be able to actually perform scientific research themselves. But in a world, now we've got this new threat, right? Which is this threat of misinformation and disinformation. Some of it is from hostile state actors. Some of it is internally generated. Some of it is accidental. Some of it is corporate, agnotology, whatever. But with, now we're dealing with this threat. And I think we need to sort of re-envision what it is that we're going to do with science education. What's the aim of science education? And so one fundamental problem with the way that we're doing science education now is that people learn memorize a lot of facts about the sort of established science, and maybe do a bunch of sort of the procedural stuff, the kind of calculations and this and that. But we don't in the least teach the sort of social processes around science that make science work in the first place. And this is absolutely critical, because this is the part where you explain to people why science is something that in general can be believed. You explain to people that, when something new happens, like a pathogen emerges out of a non-human species into humans and triggers a pandemic, that there's this period where science is struggling to figure out what's going on, where there is a lot of uncertainty, where you have people legitimately disagreeing in good faith, and all of that. And so, because people don't have an understanding of how science works and how to interface with science in ordinary daily life, they're very, very susceptible to all kinds of misinformation and disinformation. We can, of course, talk about what those kinds are. And so the idea is that we need to be creating, what Noah Feldstein called instead of creating these sort of, marginal insiders, we need to be creating competent outsiders. So people that are not scientists, but understand how science works well enough to know why to trust it, and understand that this sort of Enlightenment ideal of confirming everything by individual rationality is no longer. We live in a world that's way too complex, way too interconnected, way too technological to do that. When anyone, almost all of us, right? I mean, we may have, even if we've read the IPCC report about climate change, we probably aren't actually competent, unless we're climate scientists, to evaluate it in detail. But most scientists are highly convinced of the fact of anthropogenic climate change, as I am. And it's because we understand the social processes of science that led to the formation of an overwhelming consensus among people working in this area. We don't teach any of this. And so what I've been thinking about a lot over the last couple of years, and this is a project that we've been doing, throughout the pandemic, is to think about, well, gosh, how do we need to re-envision what we're doing at the K-12 level and at the college level in order to teach people enough about how science actually works. What is it? What is expertise? What is a consensus? How is it formed? how is it disrupted? You know, when it needs to be disrupted, why don't you believe the person who did their own research on the internet? You know, why is it impossible that scientists have discovered a better power source, but they all called each other up and said, let's not tell anybody so that big oil can make more money, and so forth. So anyway, that's the 5-minute, very long elevator pitch for what we're thinking about.
No, I love it.
Can I ask you a question? So why is this about science and not just about information? So one of the things that I was on the committee to pick a new law librarian, head law librarian at Yale. And so, I mean, this happened, it was during the pandemic, and we spoke to lots and lots of librarians. And one of the things that they pointed out is that no matter who you are, there at every level of education, students are not getting the kind of skills in just research. It has nothing to do about science, it has to do with research. And it has to do with the fact that if you use Google, you expect the answer to be in the first 5 entries.
Right.
And so even though there's very fast response, there's a lack of kind of thoroughness. And I think so. The point is just that there's a way in which having so much information at our fingertips is very confusing to everyone. And it's not just about science. It's just like is Wikipedia, is that reliable? Right. What about Reddit? Somebody said this on Twitter, like, how would you figure out whether that was reliable or not? So the question is, why is that not the focus?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that's extremely important to focus on. I've actually spent most of the last 5 years, thinking and writing about the broader need for digital literacy and media literacy. And so this is a sub-project within that. I think that, and there's a lot to say about with respect to everything you brought up that would be really interesting to discuss as well. I think that this project was, something that a bunch of us who are, professional scientists and science educators felt that we needed to say to other people that are teaching science at both K-12 and college levels. And that we feel like, I mean, basically, so that's kind of why is that people.
I got you right. It's not that this is the unique space where this needs.
Not at all. No,
right. But it's the space that you know best.
It's a space that I happen to have a little bit of pull in, and so on.
Right, and also something that has very direct policy implications.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, I think when the next generation science standards, or they're not actually quite as bad, or the vision and change document for laying out biomedical education, this is AAAS 10 years ago. They try to teach this. They have like one of their sort of core competencies or whatever they call them is what they call like the practice of science or something like that. What is it that the practice of science is? It's really disappointing. Usually what it turns out to be, when it's actually taught, is some sort of really naive folk Popperianism where you make up you believe X and then you create a null hypothesis and then you reject it and that's it. At best, it's sort of the stuff that an individual investigator could do by herself in the laboratory, and in a way, it kind of contributes to this sort of great man vision of science, this misconception of what science is. So it says, what's in these documents? It's you start by making observations, and then you generate a hypothesis, you design an experiment. You conduct the experiment, you analyze the experiment statistically, and you draw inferences from the statistical results. That's it. Now, all of that can be done by a person on their own in the laboratory. And that's the sum total of what these documents talk about the process of science. Now, for those of us who practice science know that that's only a very small piece of what's going on. The sort of ongoing discussion and formation of the competing battle between different ideas, the eventual resolution of that by back and forth between scientists, the formation of consensus, the establishment of expertise, the ongoing process of peer review, before and after the formal peer review stage. This is the stuff that matters, and this is why you can trust science, not because somebody sat in a room and did this thing by themselves.
So if I hear this, because this is fascinating. So the Popper idea, the Karl Popper idea. By the way, I heard Karl Popper speak.
Right.
Yeah, he was so ancient; it was unbelievable. But the Popper idea that what scientists do is they propose hypotheses to be falsified, ignores the social aspect of science, which is that you're part of a big community, but part of being the big community is that there are these sub-communities, and they're kind of going after each other in a kind of adversarial way.
I mean, to be fair, Popper's aware of that, and Popper's also, I think, I would read Popper as being normative rather than descriptive, and so he's not trying to come up with a descriptive sociology of science. He's thinking normatively about what processes would lead humans to better understanding of the natural world. At least that's my reading. People argue about this, but but what happens is by the time it reaches any kind of curriculum, yes, it's been distilled down to exactly that. That's why I say sort of naive folk barbarianism is, and it also ignores the fact that most of the time people are comparing alternative models to explain more complex phenomena. Each model is based on multiple sets of other models and assumptions.
Right. No joke. I mean, so much of what you're describing has to be done for grant writing. And so, like, that's just a huge part of what it is to be a scientist. And that is,
So can I just jump in there? Because this is actually loops in really well to kind of where I was going to pick up, which is when I met Scott, which is when I was applying for the Yale PhD program. And I had completed my JD, and a PhD in the United States is 7 additional years. And I wanted to go and do I was really Scott knows this. I was really drawn to doing work in psychology and cognitive science. This was kind of my undergraduate training. But I did not want to go for 7 years. And one of the reasons that I didn't want to go for 7 years is 5 of those years are not doing fucking doing actual, it's learning the political environment of applying for grants and learning the political environment of being a psychologist or a cognitive scientist at in that environment of that and I was well, that's not worth my time. It's absolutely I'm never going to be that person. I want to apply this to law. I want to be a law professor. So this makes no sense. But to that end, I matched up with Dan Kahan, who I've mentioned to you before. And what's interesting about Dan is he is kind of he is certainly a polymath. He's very brilliant. And there are a lot of things, but one of the things that we started working on was first of all, human perception and professionalism, how professionalism changes your ability to basically perceive seemingly objective events. He did a bunch of really great studies that were kind of I saw a protest, which kind of are actually about abortion rights and kind of you, depending on your perspective, and he balanced them in all these ways. But one of his bigger things was the science that I actually kind of moved away because I didn't see the applicability in 2015 was the science of science communication, and more specifically the idea of numeracy. He was kind of obsessed with the idea that kind of there was this shine, this gloss, even with lawyers and educated people, that you start mentioning numbers, that you start mentioning science, you start mentioning data sets or empirics, and people just, and we see this all the time with kind of the algorithm and how much people are just algorithm, that they just kind of gloss over this whole thing and assume this great body of knowledge or trust in this thing, and it happens in evidentiary law. It happens. It happens in. But it happens in day-to-day rationale and thinking. And so, I guess I'm kind of was going to ask, when you say education, you said K through 12, you said college, but then at this top of the show, I mentioned the kind of the Looney Tunes thing, and part of me just thinks that there's a cultural aspect to this. Like there is an early childhood development aspect to this. There is just kind of it is about increasing numeracy and scientific literacy at every stage. And I don't know, what do you think? I mean, maybe that's too big a project, but
no, it's a super important project. I mean, it was sort of my first project that got me into this space. I really hate to come on your show and pitch a book, but I actually wrote a book about this. And
you've already pitched that book on the show. You can pitch
I know, exactly.
This is, I mean, do never, ever feel embarrassed about pitching a book, especially on In Lieu of Fun.
Well, it's just completely relevant. I mean, the whole principle of the book, in a nutshell, is that in the old days, people used to bullshit people with words. They push them around with words. Now we live in this highly, quantified, data-driven culture, and the new school bullshit is all with numbers. And people bully and push around audiences, readers, debate opponents, everything else with numbers. And everyone feels like, oh, I can't question numbers for two reasons. One, it's all, I don't know how the stupid algorithm works. I can't remember what a multivariate, linear regression is. What the hell is a generalized mixed model? And so you don't try to question it. The other part is we just have this sense, even if it's not anything fancy, that numbers come straight from nature. And they're this stupid truism, the data don't lie. Well, data don't lie, but other lie with data. It's and so the whole point of the book sort of tell people, look, you don't need a master's degree in stats or mathematics or computer science to question this stuff. And kind of lay out a simple way to think about that, and talk about the way that the whole book is about how numbers are used to bullshit, and like that, and bringing numbers is a form of power that an author or a speaker is using against a reader or listener, and how to respond to that. So absolutely, I mean, that's like getting people to understand that they have the power to push back against numbers is critically important.
Oh, this is great. So, there's this idea of aside to warfare, you have lawfare, that is like using law to fight. Now we have mathfare. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
We should coin that. Coin it, Scott.
I coin it.
Start a Wikipedia entry.
I think I won a medal in that.
I'm typing it in the chat. I coin math. Oh God, please don't.
It sounds just like math fair, though.
That has intellectual property implications. Nice work, Scott. I can tell you that because I'm an IP lawyer, kind of.
Okay. It's in the chat.
Scott, don't you need a hereby in there?
I'm sorry?
Hereby.
Don't you need a hereby in there to make it into a speech act? That's sort of thing I've always wondered about legal.
I hereby.
Hereby converted to a speech act, right?
Thank you so much.
We're turning you into a legal positive.
I hereby coin math fair. Okay. Thank you very much. I almost engaged in a null and void.
I know, but that's why I'm here.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, they say when you commit a nullity on YouTube, it's forever. So
we have an amazing question from Rachel Coit, who I believe is hanging out in her lab right now, which is kind of baller. Rachel's baller. She's been on the show before like this. I'm jealous every time she does it. I kind of miss a good lab, although they are lonely places. So Rachel, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. So my question is, when we're training the next generation of scientists, should a certain level of science communication competency be seen as a requirement for this next generation, for these young scientists? Or is there a place for scientists who really have little interest in communicating outside of their field?
Nice question.
Especially if you have a field that is relevant to the outside world.
Great question. It should certainly, so I'm going to say it should certainly be readily available, and it isn't always readily available. And then there are certain obligations that I think that scientists have around science communication. So one thing I've really been going off on, for a while, looking at, so I've been writing, I wrote a paper which I last a year or two ago. It was sort of a large scale review synthesis of misinformation in and about science, looking at where scientific misinformation goes wrong. So one of the things I've been kind of railing about for a while is the behavior of university press offices. Just to give you an example of some of the training and obligations that young scientists should have. The university press offices are of course trying to make it look like there's amazing work coming out of the university, both to convince the state legislature not to completely cut off funding, and then also to try to drum up philanthropic support and so on, right? And maybe lure in investors and for their tech transfer offices. So their interest is in hyping the work. The scientist in question, if I write something of relatively reasonable interest, then the university will want to do a press release on it, and as you know, and so telling scientists about how this process works, because what happens so often is someone will work with the university press office to write a press release, and either use that as an opportunity to overhype their own work, because they can sort of do that to the press office, and then there's this sort of, we don't hold each other responsible for the stuff that shows up in our press releases, right? You have some press release that's ridiculous, and I say, like, what do you mean? You would never write that in a paper. You say, oh yeah, those university press offices, and I say, oh yeah, I know those university press offices, and so that's part. Or sometimes the scientists just think, I don't need to take care of that. The university does that. I'm not even going to read this thing. And there's been a really interesting set of studies that show that when misinformation appears in the popular press literature, and this is top venues, we're talking New York Times, Washington Post, Scientific American, things like that. We're not talking The Sun. When that appears, the vast majority of the time, the misinformation was not introduced by the science writer, but rather was introduced by the university press office. And so this is just, it's just one example, but when I gave a talk about science communication and ethics as part of the NIH ethics training here, I talked to the students about this. It's like, you are responsible. You need to be responsible for everything that comes out of your university describing your research. You need to, if you don't like the way the university writes it, you have the right and ability to rewrite it and say, you can't say that. We didn't.
Oh man, but who has time, man? It's
not that often. How many press? Maybe if you're, a mega lab, mega star, and you're doing 30 press releases a year. I do 4.
Yeah.
I do it for Yale for legal positivism. Anytime that they have that in a press release, it's not it's like once a week or something.
So
Rachel,
yes, I think that's super important. Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
Okay.
No,
Awesome.
I definitely think it's good to be, to teach people to be responsible for what is coming out of their university press office, and it isn't, I think, too much to ask.
Yeah, that's only a partial
look
answer
over and make sure that.
But I was trying to think of something that I think should be obligatory instead of just optional. But definitely we should make a lot more access available. When COVID happened, all the epidemiologists had to figure out sort of in real time how to do this, and some of us, people didn't necessarily do a good job of figuring that out, and a lot of us would have done things differently, and a little bit more training could have helped there.
Yeah, so this is super interesting, because this is something that I feel like I was talking about before. Like, I was not interested in going to grad school to learn the language of writing grants and the language of psychology, universities in America, their psychology programs, etc. I just was not going to get into that. But those are all languages. Those are all cultures that you have to become used to the norms. You have to become used to the norms of publishing, the language that they use, all of the ranking system, all of the kind of stuff. And then the money, how you get money, how you accept grants, how you don't expect to accept grants because you have a good enough salary that you don't need to write grants for yourself, whatever it is. But one of the things, and Scott knows this, and you know this too, Carl, but I worked in journalism for 3 years, and it basically served as a boot. It was I actually lived my life as a journalist and ramen every day and like, you know, have no money.
Right.
But like working as like a journalist, even for like a couple of years, like made you, I mean, like I watched people accelerate and I watched people kind of coast and I watched like what they did and what like well and what worked and how you got published in top places and how you kind of worked, how pitches worked and how all of this stuff works, how getting paid works. And this is something that like I like really do not ever do anything and don't depend on, unfortunately. I mean, I don't look at my university's communications office to do anything for my work. Like I do it all myself. Like,
Yeah.
and I mean, that's a shit ton of hustle. And it's like a totally different approach to kind of your research. And this, I was going to actually ask you both this question, but like this kind of verges on like when people verge from being like very large scale, kind of very well written and established scholars and professors, and then tip over into the quote unquote public intellectual debate. Or like, and I remember, I just feel like a public intellectual is sometimes seen as a dirty word in academia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder what both of your thoughts are on that.
Scott, you want to start? You're the public intellectual.
No, I mean, the thing is that there's, I think the stereotype and the bad name it gets is the somebody who is like kind of professionally, you know, is kind of appearing in the public media as the kind of the voice of reason, but also on any kind of topic.
Yes.
Like
there's a generalism that you can call bullshit on.
Right, and in some sense, not respecting the disciplinary boundaries that is often helpful in systematizing thought, and so that you can speak clearly because you've spent a lot of time kind of nailing down what you mean by various things. So I think that's where the public intellectual thing gets a bad name. And also there's just a kind of self-seriousness, I think, associated with it, which is also somewhat irritating.
I mean, we live in a society where Jordan Peterson is considered a public intellectual. So, you know, I mean, like it does attract a certain type of person. And there are, of course, more serious public intellectuals, but even those tend to skew toward certain types of people. I mean, Richard Dawkins or somebody like that. You know, the guy hasn't said anything about biology in 20 years. It just, you know, railed against Islam and Christianity for a while, and now I guess it supports them because they're in favor of great books or something. I don't know what the hell he talks about, but you know, yeah.
There's a ton of people who like. I mean, I've mentioned this before. Okay, sorry. I will stop prefacing everything I say with like I've mentioned this before because we've done 651 episodes.
No, but I understand the. Right, I understand the impulse, right?
Yes,
you want
I want to like self-own before someone else owns me.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I was like, I think about this. I remember like looking at Noam Chomsky and coming to Noam Chomsky entirely from a neuroscience and cognitive science point of view, and then discovering that he just stopped writing about all that shit and now just wrote about Palestine. Like that was all he did. And I was just kind of like, those two things don't have anything to do with each other. Why do I trust like Noam Chomsky and Palestine? Like he did all of these, like, you know, like there's just like, and I'm not saying I don't, by the way, I'm not like trying to weigh in. I'm actually not a scholar enough to know what to think of his work in this area at all. No. But like, this was kind of one of these things that I kind of got to this point and I was like, well, I guess I kind of, and now that I guess that I'm a little bit deeper into academia, I kind of get it. Like you have the freedom to just get bored with something and move on to like what actually interests you in a new area. And your reputation kind of can follow, but sometimes it can be completely laid bare and kind of like tank, I think, when you make that transition.
Yeah, I certainly understand the getting bored part. I mean, that's certainly been a, you know, persistent, you know, thing that I've dealt with. I work on something completely new every 5 years. So I get that part. I mean, I do hope that there will be more. I mean, for full-on public intellectual who, that's really their identity rather than their research. Yeah, that may still. There's kind of an Agricola Rex problem there. It's that, anyone who wants that job, you don't want to listen to, right? And so, but I'm hoping that there's, in the current generation, a lot more tolerance of, public outreach and public interaction among scientists. Of course, the famous example, right, is Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan never got into the National Academy, and all this discussion, despite remarkable scientific achievements, all this discussion of, well, that was his role as a popularizer, and so on. And now, it seems like everyone wants to be a TikTok star, So I think maybe there's a little bit more tolerance for having a public footprint. At least I hope so.
Yeah, just the way academics beclown themselves on social media is disgraceful, I think.
Scott, Scott's committed to the bit. You can see it in his face. I'm trying to get him to crack, but he's not going
to. He can't get me to crack.
He takes himself very seriously. Matteo, it's great to see you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Kate. I'm wondering if, Carl, if there are any particular structural or cultural changes within the scientific community that you think are like the low-hanging fruit for improving the output of the community. I'm thinking things like maybe how impact is measured, citations, how people end up getting jobs, or the publication process, things like that. But
yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. This is I'll just give you one piece of low-hanging fruit. This is not a whole fruit salad. But one really easy one is, right now people, of course, salami slice their papers because everyone wants, because, people count how many papers do you have and what's your H index and all of this, instead of writing really thorough, complete stories. And as a result, people are publishing way too much. People, middle of the road, middle career scientists are publishing 10 to 15 papers a year. Nobody needs to be doing that. And so one thing I think would help enormously would be is if evaluation for hiring, for promotion.
And tenure. This is why I take 2 years to write every fucking paper. Thanks, Carl.
Right.
I'm the same. I'm slow.
I'm slow as well. That's probably why we all end up on this show instead of everyone else.
Right. I write really quickly and I think really quickly. I'm just always on the goddamn internet. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But it's hard work being a public intellectual.
No, that's right. It's right. It's what I do as a service to the community.
But no, I think one thing you can do there that really changes the incentive structure enormously is say, look, we don't want to see so we're not going to consider the length of your CV for this. We're not going to use metrics. We want to see your 5 best papers or your 5 most relevant papers. That's it. We're not going to look at anything else when we consider your qualifications for this grant or for this promotion or for this position. And that completely changes the incentives, because now instead of trying to salami slice, I'm almost trying to stick salamis together or whatever that would be, right? And I'm trying to write big, complete stories that change the way people think in the field, papers that people would actually want to read, for God's sake. And so NIH has actually started to do a bit of this. I tend to think that the funding agencies have the strongest levers in the system to do all of this, because deans define excellence in terms of whatever brings in money. And so if NIH says we're going to do this, then excellence goes from publishing 30 papers a year to publishing 2 papers a year overnight. And so anyway, that's just one example of
UCLA philosophy department used to have this policy, which is that they actively encouraged juniors to publish very little, with the thought that you would come up and there was a suspicion of those who published a lot, as if they were diluting. And so you were supposed to come up with like three really, really good papers for tenure.
Yeah.
And still, I mean, still there's an institutional culture there of doing the opposite of, like, let's say something like University of Chicago Law School, which has always been seen in the legal academy as something where, you pump out a lot of papers. And it's funny where the prestige sometimes goes. Sometimes it comes to like huge volume, to be a Richard Posner or Cass Sunstein. On the other hand, it's to be like somebody who publishes the gems.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think, economics is better when you think about hiring that way, right? So
yeah, that's right.
and so I don't actually know the number in biology, but it's huge. The average psych professor is hired with 16 publications at the time they're hired for an assistant professorship. Economists like show up and they're happy because they've got a job market paper,
Yeah.
that like
Right.
isn't even like remotely done, and it's like one paper, and this is my job market paper. It's like, holy shit, and then people actually read that, I guess.
All of the
And-
psychologists that I hang out with, all of the cognitive scientists, all of the developmental psychologists, all of them are like, what do they call the minimum, like for every idea, like the minimum number of
publishable unit. Yeah.
minimum publishable unit. And I'm like, I don't do that at all, but I will say that, like, I probably promise myself in that kind of way. Like, I tell a lot of people that I will like try to write an essay, and then like the idea changes 15 times, realizing that like I'm not committed to writing about a particular idea when I promise to write about something, and that they just want to hear me write about something related to this thing and have it be smart, and knowing that I'm not going to publish something that's crap because I just won't let it happen, is like actually was a freeing kind of concept. But no, I totally agree with this. Mateo, you got a follow-up?
Yeah, just quickly, I was wondering, and you guys have started to get to this, how this is different across disciplines. Like, in my experience, talking to people who are in or around like the legal academy, everyone bemoans that law review articles are 100 plus pages.
Mhm.
And that seems to be the standard, and also something that people aren't happy with. And so I wonder, is that a counterexample, or like, how does that fit in?
I don't know, Scott, you answer this. I feel like, you are the expert in legal publications between the three of us.
So we'll just say that I feel like this is an example of exactly what Carl was talking about, which is a kind of the reason why law review articles tend to be really long. It is the Mark Twain line about, I'm sorry, this letter is so long, I didn't have time to write a short one. But that's the same thing about a law review article, is that because there are no space limitations, just like in science, there are no limitations so to speak, on the number of possible journals, because in some sense, most of them are web-based and yada, yada, yada. All you care about is like the minimal publishable unit. In the legal case, it's that there are no constraints on how long a paper can be, and so you can pad it with material which not only shows your competence in the area, but it also just makes it seem like a more substantial piece of work. And so in some sense, that is, if you will, a continued race to the bottom. So in science, it's things get whittled down. And here they get bloated and blown up, but they're basically still.
But when we were Morelling, Scott, we were having this talk about law reviews versus books, and like, I don't know if you remember this, but you were like, law reviews can have like basically one idea. Like, they can have like one idea, and you write all of this, you didn't say bullshit, but you like write all of this stuff around it, but it's only one idea. And like, a book can have many ideas. But my rebuttal to you is like, but nobody reads books, and like, you can break, and not that everyone reads law review articles, but for my purposes, I can just publish a law review article, place it fairly well, and then write basically op-eds and other types of smaller essays and breakouts about it, or give talks on it. And I feel like it is like, I don't have the lead time that a book has. And so that's kind of one of the things that I've kind of come around. This is like, we're so in the weeds at this point, but like, I'm like, but anyways, I was just kind of like, this is something that occurred to me.
No, I mean, first of all, that's really important. I think it may have something to do with the subject you study that is so, quickly
fast moving,
evolving. You're right. Yeah. So I'm actually curious, Carl, about your writing style, like how, and the relationship, to what you write for the public versus what you do.
Yeah. I mean, I was explaining this to a friend on the phone a couple of days ago that, if I was publishing at the rate that I do, I would not be competitive on today's job market. As a person, I can sort of get away with it, I think, because I've got a reputation already that follows me or something. I don't know why I can get away with it. I mean, partly stuff lands in good venues, but I mean, if I publish 4 research papers in a year, that's a very good year. Whereas most of my colleagues, would say an okay year is 8 and a good year is 16. Some of it is because I'm a theorist, and so it's a little bit different. But I think a lot of it is just that I don't like to just put out these kind of half-hearted stories. I mean, there's things that you could, you start working on a problem, and you could, of course, publish the first model you come up with, and then you could publish the second and the third and the fourth. But why the hell would you want to do that? It's, especially once you're past having to really care about the incentives. It's, I find the publication process kind of tedious and annoying, and I'd rather tell a story well once than kind of, chip away at it to get these different, lines on a CV or something like that. I mean, just, I guess I have this general rule of thumb that I figured out. It took me until my first year as an assistant professor, but I figured it out as my first year as an assistant professor after being burned repeatedly, which is never do something because you think it would look good on your CV. And
Scott also gave me this advice.
Oh yeah.
It's great advice.
It's like, and I've never ever regretted following that. And every time I've thought, oh well, this won't be too much of a pain, and it would look really good on the CV. Just, oh shit, God, I wish I hadn't done that. That's no. Joseph Raz used to say. So Joseph Raz, great legal philosopher, died, but I think maybe 2.5, 3 months ago. He used to say, that at least for him, you wanna be the kind of person who everyone needs to read their work, and that that there are people who, I mean, they're different. Everyone has different styles, but like there are people who are hit or miss, and they try lots of different things. There are other people who really do, like, every time they publish something, it really is just really good, really kind of gem-like. He used to say that that's what, like, he would say to students, that's what you should aspire to, and I feel the same way too. I mean, at least in terms of aspiration, of course. Yeah, and I have colleagues who I'll read, just about anything they write, whether or not I think I'm interested in the subject. And I have other colleagues I won't read what they write, even if I'm working on the subject. So it's like, which do you want to be? I mean,
it's very true. So we have BFG, which I'm going to assume stands for Big Friendly Giant, because I'm a huge Roald Dahl fan. But no, seriously, have like read every single thing that man has ever written. I really like him. Anyways, but BFG, I can't get you on screen, but go ahead and ask your question.
No, I think that the question that Scott already addressed it. It was but there's a bunch of the people that believe a bunch of very crazy stuff. So why we think that science education would deal with this issue. But I think that what Scott was saying about teaching actually how to curate information and check accuracy and reliability, I think is a good path. But I think also there's a big neurological factor there of a confluence of issues that are leading people to more and more belief stuff that are kind kind of crazy. So it's not, maybe it's not just a matter of just the information that's out there, but maybe the confluence of like the advertising model plus the isolation plus the immersion in media and things of that nature. But yeah.
I mean, coming back to that, it's really interesting. I just wanted to mention, I think people on the show.
I just want to also say, like, I think it got cut off, but he was saying there are a bunch of very educated people believing a bunch of crazy stuff. So basically, his question was why science education would resolve the issue of, like, when you come across a person who you would trust, who would curate for you, and they fall for something, or they, you know,
right.
How do you kind of how do you contemplate that?
Because I think you need to understand the nature of scientific consensus. I mean, there are lots of people who think they're Galileo, and they're out there, and they, you know, use all the right fancy words, and they probably pay more attention to, you know, credentials and things than serious scientists, and but they've got some, you know, crazy theory that this vaccine causes this, you know, kind of harm down the road, or whatever. And they sound like scientists. They've done the research. They've got a degree from a place that you've heard of, but you know, they're so far outside the scientific consensus. Their story, of course, is that the scientific consensus is sort of a groupthink of experts and is just keeping the little man down. If you understand better how scientific consensus is formed and the incentive structures that are going on, I mean, if somebody's really right about something like that, this is a chance for a young person to make their career, or a senior person to cement their reputation. And people don't leave money on the table like that. But people don't understand that. And so they figure like, oh yeah, you know, it's fascinating. I went a few years ago to a crackpot conference that was hosted here at the UW. It's a public school, so we got to open up for anybody. And there are these people that are, they call themselves heterodox scientists. And they are all, they're almost always working in these sort of, you know, big, you know, the sort of, you know, very masculine glamour fields, you know, quantum physics, you know, quantum cosmology, things like this. They've all proved Einstein wrong, or they've, you know, merged general relativity with quantum theory, or whatever. And so these people were really fascinating because they truly believed that there was a conspiracy of like, you know, big general relativity, that you know, somehow all the scientists in the world were like colluding to not admit that general relativity was hopelessly broken, and then they all had their own solutions to it. And it's just this fundamental, and they just fundamentally didn't understand how science operates. I mean, it was, and they were all doing exactly this, you know, stuff, like, you know, they were sitting in their own study and like writing out the equations and this kind of thing. The organizer finally said something to me that was or to the audience in general. He says, you know, like, we've been coming here, you know, for a decade, we haven't made any progress. And I think the problem is that everyone is, it was really interesting. It was really, this person actually understood the sort of social nature of science, unlike the other people there. The problem is everyone at this conference is selling and nobody's buying. And so that was fascinating. These people all had their own crackpot theories. Everyone there knew they were more from the crackpot. And nobody was listening to each other. Whereas, you know, when you go to a reasonable academic conference, you're going mostly to listen and learn from people. It's a really different kind of interaction.
I had a dream the other night, and it was a dream, although I take it as advice, which was that I had a dream that I was like, I was invited to like a very fancy conference, and somebody leaned across the table to me and said, "Kate, you really should just stop talking and try to listen." And like, even like the dream, I was like horrified, but I kind of woke up and was like, I should do that more. Like, that is perennially good advice, and like, I should do that more. And like, I don't know, it was like kind of a dream nightmare. But anyways, we have to get going. It is 6:02, so we're over time. But Carl, this was amazing as always.
Super fun as always.
Yeah, buy
Scott,
Carl's
great to
book.
meet you. No, don't buy my book. You know, just
yes.
have a beer and
link in the chat. And also, yeah. But let us know if you ever come to New York, and we can take you out for drinks.
I would love that, so I will do so.
All right.
Care. Great to talk to you,
Scott.
Thanks,
We
everybody.
don't have fun anymore.
So, but in lieu of fun, we can have more listening and less talking.